Hello everyone, I have a treat for you today, probably one of the funniest things that has been happening in, well, British life, I guess, for quite some time. And unfortunately I am not talking about the absolute landslide that the other parties are having over Labour at the moment. Labour are in a ditch, but we're not here to talk about that today, as you can tell from the title. No, instead we are going to be looking at scenes like this today. For those of you out of the loop at the moment, this is a large number of French fishing vessels that are not particularly happy with Jersey's rights to their own waters that they can fish in. The French want to expand their waters into Jersey's territory. They are not happy that Jersey obviously said no, so now they are trying to actually blockade Jersey fishermen from going to their rightful waters to fish. And just to prove that they are serious, a French vessel even went as far as to ram one of the vessels from Jersey. Obviously, the people of Jersey were not particularly happy about this, and some even went as far as to dress up in British Empire gear and fire blanks from a musket out to sea. So obviously things were heating up, and eventually Boris Johnson decided that he had to dispatch 2 Royal Navy patrol boats to protect Jersey from a feared blockade by French fishing vessels in an escalation of a dispute over post-Brexit access to waters around the Channel Islands. It's also worth mentioning that at least one patrol boat from the French Navy was sent to Jersey as well, but The Guardian doesn't mention that for some reason. So after the patrol boats did their job, the French fishermen dispersed, but some of them had fighting words as they were leaving. They have warned, "We will go back, and next time it will be war," which is pretty strong words coming from a country that has lost a hell of a lot more wars than they have won against the British. But also the British had some words to say, with a government official saying that the French President Emmanuel Macron has small dick energy, which is a governmental position that this channel fully endorses. So I think it's about time we got into the serious business of what the French are actually complaining about. So according to the BBC, the French authorities say new rules governing access to foreign fishing boats to Jersey's territorial waters are unacceptable. Under post-Brexit rules, which came into force this month, 41 licences or permits have been issued to French fishing vessels to operate in Jersey's waters. Access has been granted based on how much fishing they did between February 2017 and January 2020. But while some French boats have provided comprehensive information about the amount of fishing they have done in the past, others haven't. So that means that 17 of the 41 boats have been given much less access than they were expecting. If the owners produce more evidence, Jersey says, their licences can be amended to give them more. But France says there was no consultation about other new conditions affecting all boats, which it says were not arranged or discussed and which were not notified about. So this whole thing apparently has come down to a poor communication between Jersey's fishing authority and the French fishing vessels. Now, when France says there was no consultation about new conditions, I don't understand why some of the fishing vessels have given more comprehensive evidence about their fishing in Jersey's waters than others. But if we are being charitable to the French, which I don't say we need to do, but if we are being charitable to the French, this does essentially come down to a communication problem, and I don't think that's a good enough reason to try and blockade the main bay where Jersey fishing vessels tend to dock. And the BBC article goes on to describe these new conditions. The Jersey government has added what it calls 2 very minor conservation measures to the new access agreement dealing with dredging and nesting areas. It argues that neither of them are unreasonable. France argues that the new rules create restricted zones and limit the kind of fishing equipment which can be used. They say many of their local boats can be put out of business and smaller boats would be affected. If Jersey's position does not change, France is reserving the right to retaliate. It's worth noting that the current dispute does not involve other Channel Islands such as Guernsey. Now, just for the people in the audience that don't know, the reason for this is that the islands of Jersey and Guernsey are actually basically independent nations. They're just crown dependencies. So this means that Westminster has basically no influence over them whatsoever. They have their own laws, and essentially the only way that Britain is involved is that, well, they're a crown dependency, so we offer to protect them, they pay us tax. This, oddly enough, makes them incredibly rich nations, because they don't suffer from the same regulations that Westminster puts on the rest of Britain. And so this is why this dispute is only happening in Jersey and not happening anywhere else in the Channel. But back to the issue at hand, France does mention that they think they have the right to retaliate, which I'm sure they do, and the BBC goes into what their retaliation might look like. France has threatened to cut electricity supplies to Jersey. An estimated 95% of the island's electricity arrives by undersea cables from France, which is only 14 miles away. This may just be tough talk, but France would theoretically be within their right to take this action, though the private companies that actually supply the power would probably have to be strong-armed by the French government for that. The Brexit deal says that in some cases both the UK and the EU can respond to a breach of one part of the agreement, e.g. in fishing, by imposing sanctions in another area, by electricity supplies. There you go. But they would have to prove that the agreement really had been breached, and that would take some time. So the rest of the article mentions that the European Union will be involved as France is an EU country, and the UK has to represent Jersey since it is a crown dependency. And again, it seems to come down to a communication problem, because the UK says it warned the EU Commission of the changes to the fishing rights, but the EU says they only got the information a day before the licences came into effect, giving them no time to prepare or discuss, which I don't know how true any of that is, to be honest. We're kind of in a he said, she said type scenario. And either way, I think this French protest is a bit too out of hand for really what comes down to a communication problem. And my money's on that it was EU bureaucracy that brought the whole thing down. But as usual with the Europeans, everything has to be the Brits' fault, so here we are. But a couple of things I just want to talk about before we end this video. So, first things first, The Guardian, as we showed before, only showed that the UK were sending out Royal Navy vessels, and not mentioning that the French were sending patrol boats as well. Well, look at the title of this article. EU accuses UK as France seeks to rapidly defuse Jersey fishing row. France moves to calm diplomatic waters, but Brussels says Britain has breached terms of the Brexit trade deal. So the Guardian's being the Guardian and trying to put absolutely all blame on the EU, and he's saying, oh, France is trying to be the good boy here. France is the good one. When in reality, this story is fairly fresh, and we don't really know whose fault it is at the moment. Whereas obviously if you were to look more at the Daily Mail, they're saying, oh, Boris is sending in gunboats to protect British vessels and things like this. Which I would say is a more accurate narrative than what The Guardian is trying to put forward. But anyway, let's have a quick read. So the Guardian article already starts off by mentioning the French threatening to cut the power supply to Jersey, and the EU and the UK blaming each other essentially for the issue. So then it goes into this. In a statement, the French Foreign Ministry said it wanted to rapidly defuse the situation before it got out of control. We won't be intimidated by these manoeuvres of navy boats, said France's EU Affairs Minister Clement Bonnet. I assume that's how you say it, I don't know French. Our wish is not to have tensions, but to have a quick and full application of the deal. That's the case for Jersey, and that's the case for the licences we are waiting for in the Hauts-de-France region. We're working non-stop with the European Commission and British authorities, he said. A UK government spokesperson said that the Navy vessels were prepared to return to port, but would remain on standby to provide further assistance to Jersey if required. We are pleased that the French fishing boats have now left the vicinity of Jersey, but the government remained full square behind Jersey's right to impose its own conditions on the narrow stretch of water between the island and France, 13 miles away. So far so good. It appears everyone just wants to have this thing sorted and have no one hurt, and that's the reason we have patrol boats out there. It's as a deterrent, and it seems to have worked because the French vessels left. Anyway, the article continues. It indicated it would work with Brussels to resolve the dispute, which appears to have erupted over a lack of communication with Brussels and French fisheries by the Jersey authorities, though I still want an explanation as to how some French vessels managed to get their evidence to them properly and others didn't, but there we go. Jersey authorities have a right to regulate fisheries in their waters under this agreement, and we support them in their exercise with those rights. We will work with Jersey to support the discussions underway with the European Commission, said the spokesperson. The rapprochement on both sides of the channel ended 12 hours of drama on the seas, starting at 4:30 a.m, when a flotilla of French boats started to amass off the coast of Jersey. in a peaceful protest, aside from one ramming incident, I suppose, marred only by one ramming incident. Well, there you go. I wish I read that first. They entered the harbour at St. Helier in a sea of red flare smoke at 7 a.m, briefly trapping a cargo boat before retreating to a distant position, enabling freight vessels to continue their business. And you know what? Fair enough, this doesn't really sound that bad. As far as protests go, as we say, it was 12 hours of inconvenience, I guess we'll say. I suppose some of the fishermen in Jersey couldn't go out and fish that day. But as far as protest goes, I suppose this was an okay one. I just think when it comes to the French fishermen, they're getting their blame in the wrong place. It sounds a lot more like an EU-UK issue rather than really anything to do with Jersey outside of setting their own rules. Which is probably why this is diffused so quickly, to be honest. But of course, absolute morons had to have their say. Disgraced former Speaker of the House, John Bercow, was on Question Time last night, so I suppose I should just play this clip.
It's an absurd act of gunboat diplomacy. It's a bit of jingoistic sabre-rattling. And if you tell me, or anybody does tonight, that the dispatch of those ships and the fact of election day today are unrelated, I can say only that you will believe anything.
So there are French vessels that you don't really know what they're going to do, and we know that one has rammed a Jersey vessel. So, you know, you would expect things to escalate, which luckily they didn't. The reason you then send patrol boats over is to have a monopoly on force in the situation, which then essentially puts you in a position to, as I say, control the situation and allow the French vessels to leave in an orderly manner, which is exactly what happened. To call it jingoistic sabre-rattling and gunboat diplomacy is, of course, ridiculous. It was 2 patrol vessels. They were armed with a machine gun either side of the ship and a cannon. It's hardly like they sent in an aircraft carrier. It was as much force as was required, and as I mentioned before, the French sent a patrol vessel too. But then to say the ridiculous thing of, oh, he's basically implying that they only sent those patrol boats out to try and get people's national spirit up and vote for the quote-unquote more nationalist party, which would be the Tories if you are comparing it to Labour. But of course, you have the Heritage Party and other parties that are obviously more nationalistic than the Tories. So essentially what we have just witnessed is verbal diarrhea. And he goes on.
It's juvenile, it's down market, it's not constructive, it doesn't advance the cause of the arguments that need to be resolved.
What do you mean? The French vessels literally left because of it. And it's not related to the arguments, it's related to a protest in which, yeah, sure, there was only one ramming incident, but you don't know if there's got to be more. So you send in your forces to take control of the situation and make sure it doesn't happen again. To call it juvenile is ridiculous. It's like 2 boys in the playground having a scrap and then one of the teachers saying, oh no, don't go over there, that's just juvenile. Anyway, let's see what else he has to say.
And the truth of the matter is that the problem flows, as so many things persistently do, from Brexit.
Ah yes, John Bercow, one minor, and this literally is a minor fishing disagreement, and it's not even a disagreement, this was agreed upon, but one communication problem, and it's like, oh, it's Brexit's fault, or Brexit's fault, no, Brexit is to blame. It's not possibly bureaucratic failures in both the UK's government and the European Commission's government at all. It couldn't possibly be that, no, it just has to be Brexit. As I say, disgraced former Speaker of the House.
And with the detail, with the interstices of the system, with the specifics, negotiators have to deal. It isn't going to be addressed by a kind of Palmerstonian populism. And frankly, Britain can do better than that.
I mean, as we've gone through the news articles, they are negotiating. These quote-unquote gunboats, they're not gunboats, they're patrol boats. They were not put there, really, as any show of force. They were put there to take control of the situation. They are put there to make sure the French do not do anything stupid, and they are on standby to keep making sure the French vessels don't do anything stupid. It is not there to strong-arm the French into basically having us do what we want. But for some reason, John Bercow's in this war zone mindset. Luckily, we have someone a bit more sensible who was on Good Morning Britain, so let's have a listen to Lord Jeffrey Archer.
Jeffrey, they can't cut off the power. That's absolute. Mind you, I must say straight away, although I'm trying to keep an even keel on where I stand with when people have a row, I don't keep an even keel when it's France versus Britain.
Yes, I have to agree. Whenever it comes to anything with France, we always need a decisive British victory. Battle of Trafalgar 2, electric boogaloo, that's all I'm saying.
Yeah. I am clearly on the side of Britain. Right. But they can't cut the electricity off. That's drivel. The contract is between them and a company.
Yeah, this was the point I was saying before, and that's why the BBC article mentions that there is a lot of legal work before they can do anything to do with cutting off the power, basically. So it was essentially just tough talk.
They'd have to pass an act of law to cut it off. They're floundering away as usual. I know the French are wrong here. We're not allowed to discuss politics this morning, but the French are wrong.
I just beg for the day where we have an entire parliament filled with people like Jeffrey Archer.
Look, Aisha, this is pretty remarkable when we have a headline on one of our major newspapers saying, send in, the Prime Minister sends in the gunboats.
Like Palmerston. Palmerston, the last person to really do that properly was Palmerston. That's wonderful. Send in the gunboats. I'm with it. I'm with the Mirror.
Oh, you'll love to see it. I mean, honestly, as I said, yes, do send in the patrol boats, I suppose we should call them. It's what they're there for. They are there to protect our waters. And when we've got French, I mean, sure, they're fishermen and they're causing a havoc with unarmed vessels, but why wouldn't you send in the minimum required force? They sent in river-class boats, armed with 2 machine guns and a cannon, which they obviously were not intending to use unless it was necessary. So when we've got all these journalists and John Burkow going, oh, it's jingoism, oh, it's quite remarkable that the Mirror's supporting sending in the gunboats. Well, of course they've got to send in the gunboats. How else are you going to resolve the situation? Ask the French nicely to leave? I don't think you've met the French. Honestly, it's like they think the fishermen are going to be metropolitan elite types who just do as they're told because they think it's civilised. No, these are gruff working people who are less likely to move away because you ask them politely when they think they are fighting for their rights to earn a living, basically. Honestly, we do have some of the weakest people in our media. More Jeffrey Archers, that's what I say. I wouldn't be surprised if he went to the pub, he'd be like Barney from The Simpsons.
And I say England's greatest Prime Minister was Lord Palmerston.
Anyway, that is all I have for you today. So, as usual, fuck the French. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.